Mark, this is Brad Esposito,
Brad?
our general manager.
General manager.
And a
Very
member
nice
of our
to meet you.
board. And he's very humble about it, but really he's been the one who's been pulling everybody together to make this happen, and also taught me most of what I know about the railroad at this
That's
point.
wonderful.
We're standing in the heart of the historic shop complex, and there's no better person to tell you about it than Brad, who's been literally in the rafters.
I've worked in railroad machine shops. I've had a little bit of experience doing a couple of these things, but I've never seen a complete setup like this. I mean, Jonathan's been talking about how there's a foundry and there's a pattern shop and then the machine shop, and they were set up to do everything here, weren't they?
They're pretty self-sufficient for a small railroad, you know, and it's only 33 miles long. But if you think about it in the context of today, it's even still out of the way.
Right.
So everything that they needed, they had here.
Okay.
You know, they also supported the mines, you know what I mean? Because they were owned by the same company. So
Right.
a lot of that work was done here. The brick plants in Mount Union. You start building a railroad in 1874, you know, in that area, they quickly needed a shop to maintain the locomotives and the equipment. And so really where you're standing here right now, minus the stone house, which is predated the railroad, the foundry and the blacksmith shop, we believe, are probably two of the earliest buildings that were built. You know, it makes sense. The blacksmith shop was
Start
one of the
there,
earliest
yeah.
things to take care of it. They did have a rudimentary locomotive boiler shop over by the turntable, but these buildings were, you know, constructed very early on after the railroad began operations. And over time, you know, they expanded them to the footprint that you see now. But as we go through the facility, you are correct. This is a very well-equipped shop for a small railroad, and relatively modern too, considering the last piece of equipment was purchased, you know, around 1920. So they were able to do just about anything, large, small, in between. And when you see some of the things, everything from being able to turn locomotive drivers and the wheel press, as you mentioned, even down to the lampshades that they made in the tin shop, you know. So it's pretty incredible, everything that's still here that you can see from everyday railroad life.
That's the little stuff you don't think about. Everyone goes, okay, well, you got to maintain a boiler, you got to be able to turn drivers, but spinning lampshades and doing articulate tin work like that, they really were that self-sufficient.
Yep.
Wow. Well, can we go take a look?
Let's go.
So I'm seeing now when people talk about the broad top, just having a representation of America's industrial past, really what they mean. I do a little bit of machining. I'm an apprentice machinist at best, but seeing this in its current state, still here, set up the way it is incredible. What can you tell me about the shop?
So really, you know, the shops where we're standing were kind of the original footprint of it. Obviously, when they started, they had much smaller locomotives.
Right.
So over time, as the equipment got bigger, they just expanded the buildings. The machine shop, to, you know, in front of us here, and the boiler shop in the back, you know, they just got bigger and bigger as time went on.
Right.
Really, the heart and soul of the whole complex, which really hasn't changed since the beginning, was the two Babcock and Wilcox boilers that are here. Now, they are not the originals. These are were replacements around the turn of the century, but they pretty much were the heart and soul of a whole lot of things.
No kidding.
And so not only did the shop engine run off of these things, but they also heated almost every building here. And you'll see radiators, real crude radiators around all the buildings. They heated the station, they heated the Markle House, which was the president's house up on the hill, which is now the American Legion, and several other, you know, superintendent's houses and different things around. So they provided heat, they provided steam for the shop engine, also the large steam hammer in the blacksmith shop. They were the heart and soul of a lot of it. Behind these two doors over here is an electric generator, a steam-driven generator. So before commercial electricity, they were able to provide their own electricity for lighting mostly. But and it was really cool. There's a sign in there that showed that the lights would be turned off at 11 o'clock at night and turned back on at 7 in the morning. So, you know, those are the little things that you find here that are just day-to-day things that we take for granted now.
That's what really tells the story of the past. Everyone can look back and they think about what they've seen in pictures and maybe stories they've read, but the little details of the little ways of life that you don't get from anything other than, oh yeah, we're turning off the lights, no more electricity after this time, because that's incredible. That's so cool, and it's still here in this century.
That's really the story of the place. You find rosters hanging on the wall, employee rosters that have not changed, calendars from, that were never changed. Even down to in the air brake shop. Apparently the air brake guy had a penchant for pipes. Still has a little rack of pipes on the wall with burlap hanging over it. And apparently had a thing for Hershey candy bars because we found a whole bunch of crinkled, period Hershey candy bar wrappers. You just can't make this stuff up,
No, you really can't. Well, this is incredible. And seeing stationary steam is not something I have terribly much experience with, but seeing it sitting here, original boilers or not, and then knowing that it was the heart of the railroad really heating all those different buildings and running the shop and the facilities. I mean, it's hard to believe it's still here like this.
Yep, for sure.
Wow.
And one of the things too, a testament to something that the friends have done over the years, and this is a project that I actually volunteer was involved with. If you look above us here, if it looks like new wood, it is, because the building had deteriorated so much through the 90s that this engine was supported by the Park Service in the 90s to keep it was a cribbing all above it that kept the building from falling down. And it had settled almost 3 feet. And so over a period of a couple of years, a pretty dedicated group of the friends, they called the Boiler House Rats, because that's pretty much what you felt like when you were crawling around in here. They took and rebuilt the entire structure above it. And so now, that was at the point at which we could uncover the engine and actually start operating it off of air. So this is just a testament to what the volunteers can do. And, some of the projects since the foundation had taken over, they worked very hard to make it look like they've done nothing at all.
Right.
If I didn't tell you the things that they've touched in here, you probably wouldn't know.
Yeah, seriously.
And it's a testament to to their ability to get things done.
That's amazing, and that's an astounding example of preservation. So what the Friends are doing, what the Foundation's doing is incredible to see. This is a shining star on the map of preservation, really.
And it's a really good combination of the volunteers, but also the small paid staff that we have that have multiple talents of doing a little bit of everything.
Yes. So. You got to wear many hats if you're going to be involved in preservation, whether it's an engineer's hat or it's a grubby shop hat or whatever it is. You got to be ready for anything and everything. It's funny. When I worked for BNSF, we were always trying to talk about, okay, well, how can we make better processes at the shop and make the shop flow better and do all this stuff? And they paid all these guys a bunch of money to do analysis and come up with all these metrics to talk about how the shop was going to flow properly. And it still didn't really work out, and it still didn't end up being the right thing. But here we are in a shop that predates even the Inner Bay Roundhouse that I worked at by probably 50, 60 years. And the workflow was considered someone, okay, well, you press the wheels off, you bring the axle, remachine the axle, do each step, and you've got your processes lined out so you can do the jobs that you need to do. Yeah.
And one of the things here too, there's no overhead cranes, so they use a lot of chain falls and stuff.
Right.
But some of that was just simplicity of not having to haul something
exactly.
that far,
let's not move the heavy thing across.
Right, yes. But they went through thousands of wheels. It was incredible, and they all came in on standard gauge gondolas. Okay. So they would use the transfer trucks, and on one side of that gantry crane that you saw outside, they'd lift the wheels, the new ones out, bring them over here, drop them off outside. And then likewise, when they scrapped them, they would build up a pile until they had enough to fill a gondola, and then they would send them out for scrap.
Yeah. Well, shoot, how many hopper cars did they maintain?
They had a fleet of over 250, that were, and the thing is almost all of them were built here too.
Really?
The steel cars that you see out here now, there was an original order that they had ordered 2-bay cars that they liked the design, and somebody here came up with the idea of just expanding them to 3 bays. And then they built, I think, 250 of them in these shops. So outside of the components like trucks and couplers, the sheets and everything were all punched here. Everything was put together here. Plus the box cars, the cabooses, any steel car that was here was
It wasn't just a car maintenance and running repair shop.
Right.
It was like, you built stuff. This is a shop that was more equipped than some of the bigger railroad system shops that were just buying cars wholesale. That's incredible.
Yeah, and when you look at the floor in the boiler shop and everything, just to see how many miles of carts that have been drug over it, and think that they even cut holes in the wall because you couldn't get a sheet. So they cut these little doors in the wall that they would slide the sheets out the door, and and it's pretty impressive. When you start piecing, when you're here, the more you're here, and the more you realize, like, all right, well, this thing that I found in the corner over here belongs to a process.
Right.
And
what is it?
Yep, exactly. And then fitting the pieces together is just part of the puzzle. It makes it fun.
It's every day is a mystery of, okay, well, why did they have this? Why did they do this? What part was it? And then you have the aha moment of, that's what that's for.
And the cool thing, like the guys that worked here in 1956, a lot of them were older. So most of them were gone in the 70s and the 80s. And and even now when you do tours, it's always a really cool thing for me to have somebody come through here that like actually knew some of the processes. You learn almost as much as from the tours as you do sometimes giving the tour.
Right,
I'm being educated as I'm walking people through here.
That's so cool. What a treat. That's a serious business planer. Like slide valves?
A little bit of everything, I think.
A little bit of everything?
They had the small one. This is the original one, and so it's smaller than, and then over here to my right is a larger Cincinnati planer.
This is a serious business planer. It looks over and, there's an even bigger one.
And it's cool to see all the jigs and different things that they were doing. One of the things that the railroad did was almost all of their track components, like the switches and things, they were fabricated here. They were, like, some of them were commercial parts, but like the frogs, everything was either in the blacksmith shop or machined in here.
Well, why pay somebody to do it when you can pay your guys to do it?
And there's, like, when you go and you're starting to do track work, it's sometimes frustrating because every switch was either an 8.5 or a 7 3/4. You know what I mean?
It's not exactly this frog angle.
Yes,
you're fighting
exactly.
a short bit of rail that you can't bend. And,
Yep. And then all of the dual gauge switches in Mount Union Yard, which was a significant amount, were all, like, we have blueprints for a number 5.5 dual gauge switch.
Anytime that we've made a couple dual gauge switches at our museum, and it's like, it is a chore because so much of that is so custom, and getting the guard face and the gauge face and everything just right. Yeah, having your own shop to do it means that you can make the geometry of your railroad actually happen.
And a lot of the work that went into, stabilizing the buildings, the wall you see in front of us here, that had settled almost 9 inches. So Woodford Brothers in New York, up near Syracuse, had done some work for the Friends and for the railroad on the blacksmith shop years ago. Well, we brought them in and had them assess everything. And so pretty much we had to start from the ground up to where things had decayed and settled. They brought that wall up almost 11 inches, which then put everything back fairly level.
Right.
The first main reason was to get the fire suppression system in.
Right.
And so you can't put sprinklers in and then move the building.
Yes.
So you had to start with that process. That then once the Friends came in and rebuilt the floor and everything that you see over there, put everything back where they found it. And we have a very specific formula of black crud paint to make it look like you don't see it.
I love that.
That allowed us to get the fire suppression in, but then also level the line shafts. So last summer, we finally got everything leveled very well, and we're able to hook all the belts back up. And the shop engine turned every single line shaft for the first time since probably about 1957. And now over time we're starting to work on each machine. Like this planer will now operate off of the overhead belts.
That's so cool. I mean, there's a rare few places in the States that have this set up. But having this here with everything that the railroad did, doing what the railroad did, and it still operates like that thanks to the incredible amount of work that you guys had to do, is amazing. Because for those of us who are modern day machinists, we're spoiled with a self-sustainable machine or even CNC that's just one enclosed little lathe or drill or whatever it is. And we could do all our operations and control the motor and control the speed and whatever. But every machine shop back in this era, line shaft, all the way up, all the way down, driven by one engine, all the tools run off of belts, and you would engage your clutch or not or whatever and set your RPMs and go from there. And this is, I mean, I can only imagine the cacophony of sound in here when everything's working.
Surprisingly,
is it quiet?
It's quiet. I'm sure when they were machining things, you had that sound.
Right.
But truthfully, that's one of the things that is kind of surprising with the belts. is if it's running correctly,
It's quiet.
you don't really hear much at all.
That's amazing.
This is where I started volunteering. This is like my happy places where I like to be. You know, it's fun.
So cool.
And like you said, kind of alluded to, like, you know, a lot of the belt-driven places, it was a common thing. Even up into the 70s, you know, there were still shops that had it. And now they're museums, they're collections. This stuff has been here. It's, you know, been here for most of it for over 100 years. And it's a very rare thing to be able to show what the people did, what the workers did in the same place with the tools that are still on the wall.
Right. And with the equipment running past you that they were maintaining, right?
Yep, or built,
Or built, or whatever. I mean, it's, as we go through building to building and as we've been toured through today, I've really gotten the sense of, yes, no, this is as complete as it can get.
Mm-hmm.
I've always heard that it was like that, but to be here and to see it and hear the story from you and Jonathan and everybody, that's really colored everything in and made it make sense to me.
One of the greatest things, like no matter how many tours you do and how many people you bring in here, is that when you bring them through the doors, I just give them a second, because they look around first and then they look up.
Right.
And it's the same reaction from, doesn't matter who the individual is, their experience level, you know, the first time they walk in these doors, it's just, wow. That's usually the general response to everybody that comes through here.
Wow.
So it had a wood floor in here that was pretty well gone.
Okay.
And so we're in the process of
restoring,
replacing the wood floor.
Yeah.
So a lot of the equipment in here is all pretty much woodworking equipment.
Right.
So you can see the line shaft, the main shaft comes through the wall, powers this.
Okay.
And obviously with woodworking equipment, you run at a lot higher speed.
Yes.
So it's pretty impressive to see all the speed increaser pulleys that are in here, like the 6-foot wooden one that's back there that goes to the planer, you know.
Yeah, well.
So it'll be fun. We got all these line shafts ready to run. Some of the belts needed some TLC, but it'll be interesting this year, hopefully, to get that running just to see how fast it actually was.
That'll be interesting. Yeah, smaller tool, faster RPM.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so
wood.
So like the floor project, we're wanting to expand the shop tours this year, give people more of a sense of how the whole thing works. So this is a car shop. It was originally 2 bays. They eventually extended it out to 3. And if you think about it, they originally had a wooden car fleet.
Right.
Woodworking equipment.
You gotta have it.
You know, so you shift
sills,
over.
Siding, whatever.
Yep. So they shifted over to steel cars in the early 20s. And you see like it's like 18.5-inch gauge here. There's no specific gauge. They had a cart that's still here that would allow it to take the material all the way from the lumber shed and cart the material in. And same deal here, as like a kind of an assembly line process. You have your cutoff saw, the planer. This is a mortise and tenon machine that allow them to do all the intricate mortise and tenon work on a hopper, you know, on a frame or a hopper car or a box car, and then a bandsaw. But you can kind of see the process here as well.
Raw lumber coming in and we process it to the dimension we need. And then you start to get into talking about joinery and actually getting it on the car, which would presumably be on one of the other 2 tracks.
Yep. And as they shifted over to the steel cars, you learn a little bit about how they were doing things from some of the paperwork and the bolts and things. Like the center track is where they did a lot of their heavy repair work. And you see on the other end, you can see them leaning up there. There's about 7 hoppers worth of side sheets never used. All they're punched, they're ready to go. Just never used.
Oh, just, you know, we're ready to go. Railroad's going to run tomorrow, isn't it?
Yeah, right. And they did a lot of their wheel work on this end, so they'd lift the cars, roll the trucks outside. Right. And there was a little like foot wide, foot gauge cart. They could roll a wheel set up on it, push it over in front of the door where the wheel lathe was, roll it up into the wheel press, and then, you know, and then back out. So they had the whole thing kind of down. They really thought through
this shop complex.
Or they figured it out.
Or they figured it out, yes. Or they tried something and went, well.
Yeah. And so you can kind of see the running repairs were all done on the far track. And on one of the little details of things that just makes a place incredible is if you look on the wall, you can see all these white paint splotches.
Right.
So as they were light weighing the cars or doing their annual inspections, they'd stencil it. So you'd have a little dabber brush that stencils it.
Yeah, it counts
You
it,
can
yeah.
see the marks all over the place where where the car guy was just dabbing his brush. But the wooden water trough over there, what it was is that was his cleaning station for his brushes. How many times one guy dabbed his brush on that wall to build it up to that amount of paint residue is like
I mean, from here it looks like it's an inch thick.
it's almost 2 inches. Yeah, I mean, it's incredible.
God.
So like those are the little living stories that you see here. Like a guy literally spent his career.
Okay. And we got this car done, painted the car up, dabbed the brush off,
and went home.
and there was another layer.
Yep,
Another layer.
Years.
Wow. Well, we're now down here at the south end of the yard, at the last switch, the lead here next to the coal tipple, and that's quite the structure, and I'm not terribly familiar with it. What's the story?
So the original concrete structure was built in the 20s.
Okay.
As the locomotives got larger, they replaced an older wooden one just around a bend here. And unfortunately, the upper structure had deteriorated by the early 90s. And so the Kowalczyk era, they demolished the building. One of our goals is to make everything, as active as we could again.
Right.
And now having, over the next few years, a few multiple running locomotives, wanted to put it back in.
Right.
Keeps the coal dry. That's what it was designed for. So
that is helpful.
This in the fall of 2022, in conjunction with the Friends, we rebuilt the entire structure up top. The cool thing about this place is that you can find blueprints for everything. And we found the blueprints. So what you see there is as close to the original as you can get. So the goal is over the next several months is to actually rebuild all the chutes, make them functional, get the old coal that's in there out, put new in.
Because of course it's still got coal in it.
Right. Downstairs, which is actually almost 3 stories inside,
Really?
originally was housed the M&W storage area.
Right.
So we've cleaned that out. A lot of it had deteriorated to the point where we couldn't use it. But to finalize the fire suppression system, that will be where all the pumps and alarm systems and everything will be stationed, because it doesn't freeze in there. And so that has all the plumbing and the underground piping has been already installed in there. And then over this year, we'll get everything in there. There'll be an emergency generator and everything that'll be housed in the bottom of the structure. One of the things is like making these improvements and not disrupting the historic fabric.
Right.
That's as good as any place to hide something that would not otherwise have been used.
That's really smart, and that's the name of the game with a lot of this stuff. The second water glass on the steam engine. No, it didn't have it, but safety reasons, regulation reasons, all these things. You can add it and still interpret the artifact and the history and the story while also doing it in a more safe way, and that's a genius way to handle that.
Fans of the place have seen that the water columns are missing.
Okay.
There was one here right behind us. That'll all be going back in as we rebuild the valves and the system goes online this year.
That's going to be cool.
And so as you see the progress, around this end of the yard, which was neglected for a lot of years,
Right.
the work on the car shop doors and with the tracks going back into service, and behind us is now the future. So we've already cleared almost 3 miles of track, actually almost 6 between here and Saltillo, which is 9 miles away. That is our goal with the Friends, is to now start going places that they've not gone in the last 60 plus years.
That's incredible. I mean, we've just seen today an amazing amount of stuff at the shop complex, going through the shops, going through the old buildings, going through the roundhouse, hearing the story, seeing how things progress, seeing how a railroad really functioned back in the day, and how it is just a time capsule from that era. And to see all the work you guys are doing, the new wood, the new construction, rehabilitation, stabilizing the buildings, preserving things in that era, my hat's off to you guys. It's really a treasure. And thank you so much for taking us around, both you and Jonathan both. This has been amazing for me, and I hope everyone's enjoyed watching at home as well, because goodness, this is such a cool place. And to see what you guys are doing is nothing short of incredible.
Well, thank you. And
yeah.
Glad to have you, and check back because there's always something new.
We'll be back.
What's up, guys? This is Heiss, and today we're back at the East Broad Top Railroad to see something a little unusual. This is M1, a Brill-designed gas-electric motor car that was built by the railroad in their shops. Despite being over 90